Two guys, same age, same city, same 70,000 in the bank, same 80,000 salary. One buys a house, the other keeps renting and invests every dollar he saves. 20 years later, one owns a home worth over $500,000, the other has a portfolio that quietly outpaces it. The difference between them is one decision, and it's not the one you think. Here's the problem with every rent versus buy video you have ever sat through. The buying side leads with the ending. They show you a paid-off house in year 20 and call it proof. The renting side leads with freedom and flexibility and pretends those things carry no long-term price tag. Neither side runs the full math. Neither side puts every number on the table at the same time. This one does. The mortgage interest that hides in plain sight during year 1. The closing costs nobody warns you about until you are already sitting at the table with a pen in your hand. The property taxes that quietly climb as your home appreciates. The maintenance budget that never shows up on a real estate thumbnail. And the number almost nobody runs honestly. What actually happens if the renter invests the money he isn't pouring into a mortgage every single month for 20 straight years? By the end of this, you will know the real break-even point on buying versus renting in a normal market. You will know why the phrase "throwing money away on rent" is more slogan than math. And you will know the exact situations where buying is the clear winner and the exact situations where renting quietly wins. Before we get into it, if this is the kind of complete, no-agenda breakdown you have been searching for, subscribe right now. This is the channel that runs the real math on money decisions, not the version that sounds good on a thumbnail, the version that survives a spreadsheet. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Let's meet the two of them. They are both 32. They both earn $80,000 a year. They both have $70,000 saved. They are renting in the same mid-sized city, the kind of place where a comfortable 3-bedroom home in a decent neighborhood is listed at $350,000. The first one buys it. He puts the full $70,000 down, exactly 20%, which lets him dodge private mortgage insurance. He signs a 30-year loan at 7%. His principal and interest payment lands at $1,863 a month. Then he adds property taxes of $350 a month, homeowner's insurance at $150 a month, and he sets aside $290 a month for maintenance. That last number is roughly 1% of the home's value per year, the bare minimum any honest planner tells you to budget. His total monthly cost to own this home is $2,653. The second one calls his landlord and signs another lease. He rents a nearly identical 3-bedroom in the same area for $2,000 a month. Then he takes the $70,000 he didn't hand over as a down payment and drops it into a total stock market index fund. And every month, he invests the $653 difference between what the buyer pays and what he pays. On paper, the renter looks like he found a loophole. Same kind of home, $653 cheaper every month, and his capital is still in the market working for him. Now here is the thing almost nobody says out loud in this debate. The moment the buyer signs at that closing table, he is not ahead, he is behind. And not by a little. Closing costs on a $350,000 home run somewhere between 2 and 5% of the price. Lender fees, title insurance, attorney fees, prepaid taxes, escrow setup. He thought he was paying $70,000 to get into this home. His real day one cost is closer to $82,000–$88,000. That entire gap has to be clawed back before buying even starts to make more sense than renting. The real estate industry does not put this number on a billboard because it makes the first year look ugly. But it is real. It is standard, and it comes due the day you sign. This is exactly where the rent versus buy debate goes off the rails. The ownership side talks about building equity from day one. What they leave out is that in year 1 of a 30-year mortgage at 7%, almost all of your payment is interest, not equity. Of that $1,863 payment, around $1,633 goes straight to the lender as interest in the very first month. Only $230 actually chips away at the loan. So in month 1, the buyer is sending out $1,633 in interest, $350 in taxes, $150 in insurance, and $290 in maintenance. That is $2,623 walking out the door with no equity attached to it. The only part of his payment doing what people imagine the whole payment is doing is that lonely $230 of principal. The phrase "throwing money away on rent" survives because it sounds true, but run the actual numbers. In year 1, the buyer is throwing away $2,623 a month on costs that build nothing. The renter is throwing away $2,000. The renter is throwing away less. Let's push this to year 3, because this is where the fantasy starts shaking hands with the spreadsheet. Over 3 years, the buyer has paid roughly $95,500 in total housing costs. Principal, interest, taxes, insurance, maintenance, all of it combined. And of that, only about $8,300 has actually gone toward principal. His remaining mortgage balance is around $271,700. If the home appreciated at 3 to 4% a year, it is now worth somewhere between $383,000 and $396,000. His equity sits between $111,000 and $124,000. That is real wealth. It is also locked inside the walls of a house he cannot sell without handing 5 to 6% in commissions to someone on the way out. He replaced a water heater in year 2. He spent a weekend and $400 in materials fixing a wall crack. The maintenance budget covered it. But those bills don't stop coming. Over those same 3 years, the renter has paid $72,000 in rent. His $70,000 investment has grown to roughly $93,000 at historical market returns. His monthly contributions have added another $27,000 in portfolio value. His total invested wealth is around $120,000. He has not replaced a water heater. He made a phone call. At year 3, the renter is slightly ahead in liquid net worth. The buyer has more equity on paper. But the buyer cannot spend equity without selling the house or taking on new debt. The renter can touch his portfolio any business day he wants. And if the buyer had to sell right now, at year 3, the picture gets uglier fast. Take his home value of roughly $390,000, subtract a 6% commission, and that's $23,000 gone to the agents. Subtract the loan payoff, subtract the closing costs he never recovered. What he walks away with is barely more than what he put in, and in some markets, less. 3 years is not enough runway for ownership. The math hasn't had time to turn. This is the trap people fall into when a job offer moves them 2 states over, or a relationship ends, or the neighborhood changes. They bought thinking the house was an asset from day one, and they discover at the closing table that it was a slow-loading one. If this breakdown is already showing you the parts of the debate everyone usually skips, go ahead and hit like. It takes 1 second and it pushes this in front of more people who need it. Back to the numbers. Let's talk about the costs that almost never make it into a buying analysis. Start with the back-end transaction costs. When the buyer eventually sells, he pays a seller's commission, usually 5 to 6% of the sale price. On a $500,000 home, that is $25,000 to $30,000 evaporating at the closing table. Stack that on top of what he paid going in, and his total transaction drag over a full buy and sell cycle is often 8 to 10% of the home's value. That is the hurdle appreciation has to clear before this investment actually performs. Then property taxes. They grow with the assessed value. His $350 a month is based on a $350,000 home. If that home climbs to $500,000 in 15 years, the tax bill follows it up. In a lot of markets, that means his total housing cost keeps rising over time, even though his mortgage payment is frozen. The renter's rent rises too, but his landlord carries the property tax exposure, not him. Then maintenance, which is not optional, and is not always $290 a month. Budget years look like $200 in caulk and light bulbs. Reality years look like $9,000 roofs, $7,500 HVAC systems, and $4,000 foundation repairs. Over a long enough timeline, those costs are guaranteed. A homeowner who isn't setting money aside for them isn't saving. He is borrowing time against a bill with a due date nobody announces in advance. And then opportunity cost, the number that almost never appears in an ownership calculation. The buyer's $70,000 down payment is gone from the market the instant he wires it. At a 10% average annual return over 20 years, that $70,000 would have grown to roughly $470,000 in a total market index fund. That is not money he lost. It is the alternate outcome he traded away for home equity. The comparison is only honest if you count both sides of it. We are about to hit the year 10 and year 20 numbers, and this is where the whole story flips in ways that surprise people on both sides of the table. Make sure you are subscribed so you catch the deeper breakdowns this channel runs every week. Subscribe, and let's keep going. By year 10, the buyer's home is worth roughly $483,000 to $500,000 at 3 to 4% appreciation. His remaining mortgage balance after a decade of payments is around $246,000. His equity sits between $237,000 and $254,000. He has spent $30,000 to $40,000 on maintenance, repairs, and small upgrades over those 10 years. The renter has been investing since day one. His original $70,000 has grown to about $181,000. His monthly contributions averaged roughly $580 a month, because as his rent crept up around 3% a year, the gap between his costs and the buyer's costs slowly narrowed. That contribution-driven growth adds about $110,000. His total liquid portfolio at year 10 is roughly $291,000. On liquid net worth, the renter is still ahead. The buyer's equity of about $245,000 trails the renter's $291,000 in invested assets. But something important has quietly shifted underneath all of it. The renter's rent by year 10 has climbed to roughly $2,690 a month. He is now paying nearly as much as the buyer every month, with nothing building underneath him, and the buyer's mortgage payment is fixed for 20 more years. The renter's rent will only keep climbing. By year 20, the buyer's home is worth roughly $670,000 to $700,000. His mortgage balance has dropped to around $188,000. His equity is roughly $482,000 to $512,000. He has spent somewhere between $55,000 and $75,000 total on maintenance over the 2 decades. And his monthly housing cost has stayed anchored near that original $1,863 payment even as everything around him got more expensive. The renter's portfolio at year 20 is roughly $550,000 to $580,000, assuming he held through every single market crash without flinching and kept contributing even as rent ate more of his income. His rent by year 20 has climbed to around $3,600 a month. In the later years, his monthly contributions shrank because the cost advantage he started with is gone. The compounding that powered his early years is now partly offset by a rent bill with no ceiling. At year 20, the buyer has roughly $480,000 to $510,000 in home equity. The renter has roughly $550,000 to $580,000 in liquid assets. The renter is slightly ahead on total net worth. But the buyer has something the renter does not. In 10 more years, the buyer's mortgage ends. At year 30, he owns a home outright worth $850,000 to $950,000, and his monthly housing cost collapses to taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Call it $900 to $1,100 a month. The renter at year 30 is still paying rent, which by then has climbed to $4,700 to $5,000 a month. No asset, no endpoint, no floor under his cost of living. Now here is the part that changes the renting side of this more than anything else. The rent and invest strategy works, and works extremely well, on one condition. You have to actually invest the difference every single month, including the months when the market drops 30% and every instinct you have is screaming at you to sit in cash and wait it out. Every analysis that shows renting beating buying is built on the assumption that the renter invests every dollar of that cost gap with perfect machine-like consistency. The data on whether real people actually do that is not encouraging. Most people spend the difference. They upgrade the lifestyle. They take the trip. They move into the nicer place because they can. When the number in the checking account grows, they find a reason to spend it. The buying strategy forces savings automatically through the mortgage payment, every month. No willpower required. That forced discipline is worth something no spreadsheet ever captures, and it is the single biggest reason ownership builds more wealth for the average person than the theoretical numbers predict. Think about what that gap actually looks like over 20 years. The renter who invests every dollar of the difference ends up with the portfolio we just modeled. The renter who invests half of it and quietly absorbs the other half into a slightly nicer life ends up with maybe $250,000 instead of $550,000. Same rent, same starting point, same market returns. The only variable that changed was discipline, and it cost him $300,000. That is the silent tax on the renting strategy, and it doesn't show up in any comparison video because it depends entirely on a behavior nobody can model for you. The buyer never faces that tax, not because he's more disciplined, but because the bank removed the choice from his hands. Now let's be just as honest about the buying side. Because the people who skip this part are the ones selling you the rosy version. The break-even timeline is longer than most buyers expect. Once you factor in closing costs going in, selling costs going out, and those interest-heavy early years, buying usually doesn't start beating rent and invest until somewhere around year 5 to 7 in a normal market. Buy a house and sell it 3 years later, and there is a very real chance you came out behind a renter. Mobility has a price, and ownership makes mobility expensive. Concentration risk is real and badly underrated. Ask a homeowner in the wrong city in 2008 what it feels like when your single largest asset drops 30% and you can't rebalance your way out of it. The renter is spread across thousands of companies in dozens of sectors. The buyer's entire net worth is stacked inside one building, on one street, in one zip code. And that risk isn't just about a national crash. Entire regions have gone sideways for a decade while the rest of the country climbed. A factory closes, a major employer relocates, a neighborhood that was supposed to gentrify simply didn't. The renter in that scenario signs a new lease somewhere better and moves on with his portfolio fully intact. The buyer is chained to the asset. He can't follow the jobs without selling at a loss, and he can't sell at a loss without wiping out years of payments. Diversification isn't an abstract finance word here. It's the difference between being able to walk away and being stuck, and liquidity matters more than people think. Right up until the moment they need it, the buyer cannot sell 5% of his house to cover an emergency. He cannot reach his equity without taking on more debt at whatever the new interest rate happens to be. Home equity is wealth you cannot easily touch, and the act of touching it always costs you. If this is more useful than the version that just tells you to buy, or just tells you to rent, hit like right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this reach more people. And subscribe if you haven't yet. Here is the honest answer, and it is not the same answer for everyone. Buying wins clearly in specific situations. If you are planning to stay put for at least 7 to 10 years, the transaction costs stop dragging on you and that fixed payment becomes a massive long-term advantage. If your local price-to-rent ratio, the home price divided by a year of rent on a comparable place, is under 20, buying tends to pencil out in your favor. If your rent is already close to what a full mortgage payment would run, the financial case for renting gets weaker every year. And if your market consistently appreciates above the national average, the leverage built into a mortgage accelerates wealth faster than an equivalent portfolio position can match. Renting wins clearly in other situations. If there is a real chance you move in the next 3 to 5 years, the transaction costs alone will probably leave you behind. If your local price-to-rent ratio is above 25, renting and consistently investing the difference will often beat buying even over long horizons. If you are in a career phase where staying mobile drives real income growth, the flexibility premium of renting has genuine economic value that never shows up on a spreadsheet. And if you can actually hold the discipline the renting strategy demands, investing every month, holding through every crash, never touching it, then the math is on your side. But here is the question that quietly changes everything in this analysis. What if you didn't have to choose at all? What if you house hacked? Bought a duplex, lived in one unit, rented out the other, and let a tenant cover most of the mortgage while you kept investing on the side? Or what if you simply bought in a stable market and kept your investment contributions running at the same time, instead of treating it as one or the other? The math on combining both strategies is a completely different conversation, and the numbers in that version change almost everything we just looked at, because the most important question in this whole decision is not which side wins on average. It is 2 questions, and only you can answer them. How long are you actually planning to stay? And if you rent, are you honestly going to invest the difference? Not plan to. Actually do it, every month, through every crash. Everything else flows from those 2 answers. The math, the comparison, the year 20 outcome, all of it depends on what you actually do, not what you tell yourself you will do. And that is the only version of this analysis that means anything. If this gave you a clearer picture of what renting versus buying really looks like when you run the full numbers, not just the equity part, not just the freedom part, but all of it, hit like before you go. It genuinely helps this reach more people. Subscribe for weekly breakdowns that take money decisions apart completely, honestly, with real math and no agenda. And drop a comment. Are you team rent, team buy, or somewhere in the middle? I read every one. See you in the next one.